Welcome back to the program. The last time we had this conversation on mental health, I can't forget the definition that our guest gave to that important aspect of our health, and she said the health of the mind. And since then, I've been more deliberate about my mental health. That conversation resonated so much with you that you asked that we bring it back, and so we're being deliberate about it, and we've brought it back just for your benefit this morning. Before we introduce our guests, you're saying also quite a lot on X, you know, our favorite platform, one of our favorite platforms on the program. So we're going to start with the conversation from your end, of the divide. Kaide, you have the first tweet.
Oh yes, actually we're talking about depression. It says, if you've ever experienced a drop of depression and anxiety, I don't think you'll ever mock people who take their life. And this is tied to an incident that got a lot of people talking last week. Very sad incident, really. And goes on to say, everyone has a threshold of pain and how much they can take. You're not tough. You just haven't reached yours. Ends by saying, don't test the devil.
Yeah, and this is coming from Invis. Said depression is sleeping through the day in a dark room. Depression is ignoring calls or texts from family and friends. Depression is feeling lonely but not wanting company. Depression is a disease. It's called the silent killer for a reason. If you're still here today, quite touching, the person says, I love you.
Now, Ray Cypher says a lot of young people are battling with depression, low key, and it's not even about relationships. They just want to survive. God heal whoever is hurting. Amen to that.
I think we can all say amen to that. Yeah, there's so much really from that, but let's get into the conversation. Perhaps we'll take some of the feedback as we go on the show this morning. But let's meet our guests. We have joining us right here in our Lagos studio. She's making a comeback. We did promise that we're going to keep her, and we're sticking to that promise.
She's on retainership.
You know, right? Dr. Bojbola Abiri, consultant psychiatrist, managerial psychologist, CEO, ReadyMed Consulting Services. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. And we have joining us for the very first time now, Chioma Fakorede, mental health and wellness advocate, founder, Olama Cares Foundation.
Thank
it's good to have you on the show as well.
Thank you very much.
You know, reading those posts on X, I saw both of you resonated with it. Of course, you've seen a lot of cases, and for you as well, but you have a personal story.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we'll begin from. So a lot of people can see that, oh, I'm not the only one here. There are a lot of people who have gone through this and are kicking life, literally. They've recovered and they're doing great. So if you could just share a bit of your personal story with us and why this means a lot to you.
Okay, so I run a foundation, Olama Cares Foundation, and it's for people living with mental health condition. We provide support for people living with mental health condition. Coincidentally, I've worked with her a lot in the past. So when I saw her here, it was very interesting to see. So for me, I was first diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety in 2018, but eventually it was a misdiagnosis. Actually, I was diagnosed later with bipolar disorder. But then one of the characteristics of or symptoms of bipolar disorder is also depression as well. And I think I would call myself very high functional. So I do a lot of things. I am an achiever, high achiever and all that. But I've seen it play out in a lot of things that I have to do. Marriage, triggers. I gave birth like 2 years ago, and one of the times that it played out was postpartum, because I had a lot of issues after birth. Because one thing that happens with you is that, with me, is that stressful moments trigger me a lot. So having a child and having a history of bipolar and, a mental health condition really stressed me a whole lot. So I saw myself having to go through rage. I was having episodes and, a lot of things during that period. And at some point, I landed in a psychiatric hospital. I was there for like 5 days because of the experience. And, it's been an interesting journey. It's been a journey for years. And every time I've had to take medication, have to visit the doctor. But I think the most unique part of it is still being able to thrive regardless of everything. Sometimes you're in your lowest low and you can't do anything. And then you have people who are there to encourage you. My doctors, I don't play with them. My family too as well. And then people who are also looking up to you, because it's like, oh, this girl is doing everything she's doing regardless of everything that she's going through. And I think that's what makes it maybe easier in a way.
So there's always that question, are you better now? how are you handling it now? How are you managing it now? Is it a lifelong thing? I remember seeing a movie, I think The Brilliant Mind, and he was asked that as he recovered, and he said, well, it's something I have to do. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's something I have to deal with every day. So is it a lifelong thing that you have to always manage? And just maybe share that part with us.
So people say, oh, you recover from mental health. I'm like, yeah, no. You know, it's something that you manage it and then it occurs. So for me, as I said, my trigger is really stressful experiences. The moment I get into that phase, I have to be very careful and very intentional of everything I'm doing. If not, you know, I would get back into it. So having to take medication, seeing a doctor, having a proper mental health support helps me. But it's something, as I said, I've been on this for years. Even before I got diagnosed, I think after my diagnosis and my first therapy, I had seen that I had patterns before that I didn't even know existed. And until I started going for therapy, I realized that, oh, so this thing had been displaying since when I was young, you know, had been this whole mental health condition. And so for me, it's lifelong, but it's manageable. It's something that once you are going for therapy, you're taking your medications if you have to, then you'll be able to manage it and knowing your triggers, knowing the things that bother you, right? So you have to be very intentional about it. So I'm very intentional. I know conversations that will lead me there. I know people that would lead me there. I know things that would happen to me, and unless I deliberately, intentionally decide that, you know what, I want to get into it, then yeah, that's it.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to avoid going to the doctor quickly because there's a lot of questions. We'll say end up with the doctor. So I'm wondering, in your line of work, what are some of the mistakes you have noticed? That's why I'm avoiding the doctor. She has her answers. What are some of the mistakes you're noticing that people are making? For you now, part of your coping mechanism is the fact that you found out your triggers. But there are people that may not have found out their triggers and they keep going there. So that could be mistake number one. They've not found. Because I remember when I was robbed in a bus, in Port Harcourt then. No, not in a taxi. I had enough money to take 3 taxis if I wanted to, but I wanted to be clever by half. So I took this taxi. I didn't know that the man in front of me, the driver of the taxi, the one in front here, and then the one beside me were all robbers. And then before I know, guns came from front, from side, at some point in the journey. And I was just, in fact, it took me like a few seconds to realize that I was being robbed, because a Port Harcourt boy robbed me how now? Where do you want to come from? But it was a crazy incident. At the end of the day, I realized that thing stuck with me for almost 2 years. If I enter any vehicle, I would not sit in the middle. So that was my own coping mechanism in public when I was into public transport and all of that. So you have found out, I have found out in how to, if I enter a public transport, where not to sit. I will avoid it. In case anything happens, I know where to run. So what are the mistakes you've noticed that people have made that they keep falling into this situation all the time?
So I think number one, first of all, is people not accepting the fact that mental health issues exist. You know, everybody is really just coasting. It's like, yeah, we know that there's something wrong, but we don't want to accept it. I think it's the fear of maybe the unknown. I usually say, I remember when I started my whole NGO thing, and I went to a private school, studied engineering for 5 years, and I remember having to tell my parents, oh, I want to go into the NGO space, and my mom flipped, and she's like, NGO, after this is almost 8 years now of me doing this, and everybody has just fallen in line. In fact, I hear my parents using conversations and words around mental health now. These are people that would never have used it before. And I remember I did then when I would tell my dad, oh, mental, whatever. He didn't even allow me complete. Whether it's mental health or mental health issue, he's not ready. Mental, no, we're not talking about it here. So a lot of people don't even want to get in. They don't want anything that would attach them to that word mental. And then another thing too as well, and I think this is where Dr. Abiru come in, is a lot of times we have, I wouldn't say quack, but these days a lot of things are springing up. So people are not making their research. People just, oh, I wake up, I do a 2 weeks course, and oh, yes, I'm a coach. I've been doing this for 8 years, and sometimes people want to refer to me as a coach or whatever. I'm like, please don't call me. I'm not that in any way. Yes, I've taken some trainings and all that, but I'm doing it solely for the purpose of the work that I'm doing. Don't refer to me as that. But you get a lot of that. There are a lot of quacks. There are a lot of people who are coming out there to post. So you're even making the issues for those who already have something existing worse. And then at the end of the day, people fall into the hands of these people, and then it gets terrible. Go and see your doctor. Go and see a psychologist. They are there. There are federal hospitals that are there to help you, and there are private hospitals too that are there to help you, and NGOs that will also give you the support. Again, with the caveat of having to be sure that whoever you're going to see is the right person to see. So yeah.
Yeah. So many things coming out from what you're saying. You've talked about postpartum depression. It reminds me of what Dr. Abiri said last week, that, you know, mental health is not just for those who are on the streets and have become to be called government property. We have our third guest, Anonymous, who's joining us virtually. I'll come to you. I'd really like you to tell us what postpartum depression looks like, because someone also said in one of our posts on X that it's not about relationships. So I'd like you to talk more about that, and Dr. Abiri would expatiate on it. But I'm coming to you, Mrs. A. Our anonymous guest will be simply known as Mrs. A. So share your own experience with us. What was your challenge? What did your challenge look like? And how did you come out of it? And thank you for being willing to share your story, by the way.
Good morning, everybody. Am I loud and clear?
Yeah,
yes, you are. We can hear you.
Yes. So, I can't go into all the details because most likely I will keep talking to you tomorrow. But summarily, it was, let me just call it hell on earth, because when it comes to mental challenges, sometimes you don't really know how to express yourself in words. Mine was marital. Hello, are we together?
Yes,
yes, we can hear you.
Yes, yes. Mine was marital, and unfortunately, let me use the word unfortunately, I was married to a pastor. And then we all know how the religious section is. When you are the mother of the church, and then you have to keep smiling, you have to keep smiling, you have to keep a bright face. And then the man is the angel, everybody knows. And then all of a sudden your work comes crashing down. You thought you were getting it right. And you know, before I knew I had issues, I was rushed to the hospital. This was what happened actually. We had a misunderstanding, I think the biggest ever. And then he left. And then I left when I couldn't understand what was going on. And then he told people to tell me to come back so we could resolve the matter. We came back, and like 3 or 4 days after, I was even actually cooking. And then they brought me a letter, and it was a divorce letter. So everything just went blank. I opened my eyes, I just saw something turning up there, and I noticed it was a fan. By the time I came back to my senses, I was like, the first thing on my mind was, who is going to pay the hospital bills? I said, doctor, discharge me. And that was the downfall. That was just, I went down. By the night, I noticed my right hand, my left hand, my right hand and my right leg weren't really functioning. I was talking gibberish. And then they confirmed that I was showing symptoms of the early stages of partial stroke. But that was even as painful as, you know, when you really don't have anybody to talk to. You understand? The man is seen as an angel. You understand? That's just the most difficult part of it is when you are suffering, you are dying, and then the person causing the harm is getting kudos out there. He went all out to paint me as a bad woman. I became so depressed. I think along the marriage, I attempted suicide 3 times. So I had to be taken back to my parents' house so that I could be monitored, so that I will not just one day go and jump into the lagoon. So that was the battle, everyone. And then let me just summarize it. It was hell. It's not something I wish my enemies. Now, how did I pull through it? I think one of the things about mental trauma is that you will hear voices. Permit me, I can assure you will hear voices. But what I did was that I tried to make sure that the voices I was hearing in my head were that of the Holy Spirit. You understand? Because I came from the Christian angle to it. I was praying, I was just trying to keep together. I was like a rope. I was so thin, I was emaciated, I was devastated. Mention all the adjectives. You know, so I kept on. You know, sometimes when I want to just break down, I hear the voice again, say, keep calm. So one of the things I did that God helped me was one day I just heard another voice that told me, stop begging him. Hello, are we still together?
Yes, very much so. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just had that inner voice that said, stop begging him. Honestly, it was just as if Jesus Christ resurrected in my room. That's the way it was. Because that was the day I started coming out of that pit. It was a deep pit. Even my mom, nobody believed I could survive it. It was that bad. So the number one thing I did, and I appeal to every woman there, is to accept. So I started accepting that, this man has done it. He said he's not interested. I'm a bad woman. Let me tell you how bad my offenses were, according to him. When we went for mediation, my offenses from him were running into 114. Yes, it was that bad. He started narrating my offenses back before we married, when we married, pre-marriage offenses, during marriage offenses, and then the list were going on. So I had to accept, okay, he has rejected me. And that was my healing. That was the first stage of my healing. And the second thing I did was that, I allowed people to get to me. People were talking, some people abused me. My neighbors were so wonderful. When they see me, they say, what happened to you? You were looking bright yesterday. You are started again. Our mothers, they will bombard me.
All right.
And then that thing will snap me out of it.
All right.
Those were part of what I did anyway.
All right. Interesting story, and I wish we could continue listening, but let's give time, for responses, particularly from the doctor. Now we'll get back to you, Mrs. A, but we noted that you said one of the ways that you came out of this experience was acceptance of your predicament, and then filtering what you were hearing. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Abiri, I'd like you to respond to a lot of the things that you have heard, and perhaps puncture those myths about mental health being just about those who have completely lost it and on the streets.
All right, thank you very much. I think one of the first things I want to say is to thank Chioma and Mrs. A for their openness, vulnerability, and courage. When we have people with lived experiences share their stories, unashamed, in a very unashamed way, it gives courage and a voice to other people who are struggling and suffering as well. I also want to thank the people who sent those tweets. I was listening to those tweets and I had goosebumps. As in, it's difficult to, talk about shoes that you haven't walked in. So, some people just dismiss depression and say, oh, we're the happiest people in the world. Come on, snap out of it. What's going on with you? And I think that's where the conversation has to start. I'm particularly happy that, her story and Mrs. A online actually talked about the fact that you need to come to a place of acceptance. One of the biggest, defense mechanisms that we use, and I did talk about this last time I was here, is denial. No. I reject it. It can't be me. It can't be happening to me. I'm Christian. And yes, it would give you some leverage and some level of strength, but accepting it is extremely important. Depression is a mood disorder, and it can happen to anyone. Even the finest of us. This weekend I was listening to a psychiatrist tell her story about how she went through marital crisis, talked about the shame, the rejection, and how it is that she eventually had to come to a place of acceptance that it's over. Value yourself, take yourself above this thing and move on. So I think a lot of times people also need to realize that depression most often happens in response to a loss. When you lose something valuable, something that you held in such high esteem. It can be a job, it can be a promotion you were looking forward to, it can be a relationship that you had hoped would be the best, it can be a marriage, it can be, waiting for a child, it can be failure. When people lose something of value, something that, they hold very dear, the response is depression. And of course, depression shows up differently in different people. It shows up differently in children, in adolescents, in adults, in males, in females. And of course, like I said last time as well, there's also the functional smiling or max depression. But what usually would happen is that you have a mood disorder in which, the core symptoms of mood, energy, interest, all low, persistently for at least a 2-week period. And then you can have the additional symptoms of, things like, we call them the biological symptoms. Appetite for food, appetite for sex, sleep, low. But sometimes, interestingly, they can be high. And then of course you also have, reduced concentration, poor attention, guilt feelings, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, helplessness. Then people can go ahead to self-harm by cutting selves with different things, from blades, from sharpener blades, to taking alcohol excessively, eating excessively, having indiscriminate sex, engaging in impulsive activities, and of course the extreme, suicide.
Pardon me.
Just to put this in for
Okay.
those who are watching and they're thinking, well, these are all women, right? So is this a woman thing? Oh, I'm a man, I'm good. Thank God, it's not for me. I'd like you to also speak to that and maybe have each of us just say a word or two about that for those who think, well, women are more predisposed to it. Maybe data, there's some back into that in data, but what do you say to that?
So usually when you look at the causes of, or causation of mental health disorders, you usually look at what is known as biological, psychological, and social. Biological will speak to the genetics, the genetic basis. And what research has found, I like that we're going back to data again, is that depression is 2 times more common in females as it is in males. You can attribute that to, for instance, the genetic makeup of a woman, the hormones, the many hats that a woman has to wear. I have to be wife, mother, sister, daughter. I still have to show up at work. The fact that society is not so kind sometimes to women. I mean, sometimes, when women want to talk, they say, oh, women talk too much. Women are always talking. And then sometimes, of course, the society is also kind to men. A man can light up a cigarette if he feels overwhelmed. If a woman lights up a cigarette beside you, you're looking at, well. Or men can drown their sorrows with cigarettes as well. So women are more likely to come down with depression. Women are more likely to show the symptoms of depression. But of course, men also struggle and suffer from depression. But usually, what the society would always say is, now guy, you be now, man up. You can't cry. Men don't cry. Boys don't cry. Just, So a lot of interplay of factors, biological, psychological, and social. But more often than not, the woman will show up with this.
Maybe that brings me to some information I got from experts like you that women contemplate suicide more, but men complete it.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
So again, women are more likely to self-harm and some attempt suicides as well. But men, when a man gets to the end of his rope and he looks at it that all that I need to do is end this, it takes a very high degree of hopelessness. I mean, what we always say is that the very defining feature that you see in people who decide to end their lives by suicide is that degree of hopelessness. And so a man thinks about it and says that if I'm going to do it, then I may as well just complete the job. Then, of course, as compared with women, men are more likely to seek out lethal means. A rope, a gun, jumping. Again, they have access to some of these means. Women are more likely to, say, oh, I want to, overdose on a particular medication. I want to cut myself. So availability of means, and of course, how desperate that individual is to carry out the act that they have thought about.
Dr. Abiri, Amara comes to mind now, the lady who trended in the outgone week, coupled with the stories that we have heard now about postpartum depression. Some would think that particularly because of this question that Kadia has asked, that people are more predisposed to attempting suicide or going the whole hog because of relationship issues. Talk to us about postpartum depression. I want you to also expatiate on it. What does it look like? What does clinical depression look like, particularly when it is unrelated to issues of relationship?
Okay, so relationships are big in causing, depressive symptoms and quite a number of other symptoms in individuals. However, to make a diagnosis or to say that an individual has what is known as clinical depression, it of course has to be made by a professional. And what you would find is the key symptoms that I said earlier on, the core symptoms, energy, mood, interest, and the additional symptoms, the biological symptoms, attention, concentration, all of those things that I had listed earlier. The individual would have a mix of the core symptoms and the additional symptoms as well. So usually major depression, so there's mild depression. Mild depression, you can have one core symptom and maybe 1 or 2 additional symptoms. There's moderate depression, where you can have 2 of the core symptoms and you have maybe 2 of the additional symptoms. But when it's major depression, you see all those core symptoms, the individual has everything. Then the additional symptoms, 4, 5, and even more. And then of course, sometimes you find that this individual has what we call the red flag, suicide. So clinical depression, and those symptoms must have been present for at least a period of 2 weeks, increasing again in intensity, frequency, causing distress for the individual, and making it difficult for the individual to enjoy themselves, enjoy relationships with others, function, or even work in the environment. Now, postpartum depression, post, after, partum, delivery. is a special type of, depression that happens in men and sometimes women. Except that men, the men don't give birth, but the men also struggle with depression after their wives, have had babies. It's interesting. There's a syndrome that we know in, psychiatry where when the woman is pregnant, the man also shows symptoms.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. So postpartum depression happens after a woman has given birth, and it's more likely to happen in women who are first-timers, even though it can happen in women who have had a lot of children, women rather, who didn't have any form of support. Women who are in relationships that are difficult. I'm a single woman, I'm not married, or the father of this child has refused the pregnancy. Or sometimes women who are, for instance, you've had like 5 girls and they're saying, this one that you're bringing to life, it had better be a boy. It can also happen.
All right, well. Maybe let's just take a last thought from Mrs. A. Mrs. A, if you can, we're happy that you found a way around this. So as a word of encouragement to people who are still dealing with this situation, how do you help them to accept their reality?
Yeah, the first thing is that you must understand that the person you are dealing with is a human being. He has his standards, he has whatever it is, and you may not be able to meet up. So that's what I want to tell women out there, that you may never, and when I use the word never, be able to satisfy everybody. Because in my own case, I married a pastor, I felt he's a perfect person, he's everything. And sincerely, let me confess, I attempted suicide 3 times. The second time I took a drug overdose, I admitted myself in the hospital after second thoughts. The fourth time, that's the first one my neighbor preempted. I wanted to go and jump into the 3rd Mainland Bridge water. You understand? It was that bad. So I want to encourage every woman now that, number one, it doesn't worth it. Honestly, it doesn't. Now look at me. I'm so happy. In fact, I'm happier. I'm even scared they will tell us to come and reconcile now, because I'm back to singing. I've discovered myself. I even remember I'm a journalist. In the course of depression, I forgot I went to school. I forgot I had a shop. I locked it up. So, it's about you, my sister. That's what I just have to say. It doesn't want it. Right. Come out of it. Accept it. He doesn't want you, but there's somebody out there that will accept you for who you are. But you first of all have to see that the person is just saying his own opinion. That is not who you are. I think that, let me just rest it at that, because there are a lot to say.
Right.
But I'm a survivor, and I can share it anywhere.
Absolutely.
Especially
yes.
in the churches, in the Christian, in the
worship centers, right?
Yes. There's a way they kind of put us in the teacup, and then they expect you to be sipped.
All right.
They expect to keep on being sipped, and before you know it, the cup gets drained. It gets drained. Yes, so for the women in the church, please, no. Don't let them use the Bible to hold you captive. You need this life.
Well, Mrs. A, we have to thank you really for sharing your story. And I think this speaks to even the stigma that is attached, because she chose to be anonymous because of the stigma attached. Chioma, final words on this. We're ending on a cheery note. The fact that, yes, you will go through this possibly, but you can come out of it and do great things. I mean, look at you, beautiful Mrs. A, doing great. She's just happy and stuff. So our final words to anybody out there who's going through these challenges, what would you want to tell them? By the way, Mrs. A also went through therapy. It's important to know that you went through therapy and she was certified afterwards. So final words from you, Chioma.
I think for me, first of all, is just really, there's always hope. Having your support system is always very important too as well. Taking seriously the doctors who are in charge, that's why they're doctors, and just really having the understanding that this thing really exists. You can be as high functional, like I've received awards, I've done so many things that I can do within this space, and every day that I am here, I'm happy to have lived this experience, because I'm always there to share to other people that there's hope, there's really hope, and you can be fine. I have a beautiful 1-year-old who is bouncy and is
glory to God.
I was on the verge of, this is like one of our most emotional conversations. Thank you so much, really. We shall do this often to help people out there. So Dr. Bojabola Abiri, consultant psychiatrist, managerial psychologist, CEO Ready Med Consultant Services. Thank you so much. Chioma Fakorede. It just hit me that I have come across you on social media at some point. And it speaks to how you can make an impact in spite of all of that. The mental health and wellness advocate, founder Olama Cares Foundation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
As well as
Thank
Mrs. A, our anonymous guest who has gone through these challenges and come out of it. Thank you so much, Mrs. A, for sharing your experience with us. Thank you. We'll go to break now. When we return, we have one more stop. Are you ready to move your body? Yeah, stay with us.